Well, this afternoon's project for us here in Norfolk is to try and clear out some of the mixed weed seedlings and grasses, tree saplings. We've got all sorts coming up in here. It's the edge of the gravel courtyard that is usually very beautifully planted with a mixture of cottage flowers, hollyhocks, honesty that you can see flowering here beautifully. We've got valerian coming on later in the season, and there's some oxeye daisies and this creeping, I don't know what the name of this one is, but this throws up little orange dandelion like flowers on about foot tall spikes, but it's very invasive, creeps everywhere, spreads out, and it's a bit of a thug, so it does need pulling back. And it's a problem with sort of naturalised plantings like this. They do tend to encroach into your parking area or gravel courtyard or whatever you're using the space for. But also, while it's nice to let them naturally seed with a whole mixture of things, you do tend to get certain things becoming dominant, and if you don't thin those out and just leave them where you want them, they will tend to overpower, and you'll lose some of the nicer seedlings and plants that we've got coming up in here. And we really do want this honesty to seed into here. It's flowering nicely here, but it's nowhere near as dense as it has previously been in previous seasons. Now, that's quite often the case with honesty, because being a biennial, it does tend to have a sort of almost cyclicity to it. You'll have it good for a couple of years, then it won't do as well, and then you'll get a good crop of seedlings, and the subsequent year it will flower really beautifully. So we want to try and encourage some of the seedlings of the honesty to get established in here and thicken up slightly, so we've got a thicker density of these flowers at this time of year, which are one of the first to flower in here and one of the most pretty. Here's another area that we really want to try and thin out. Some lovely Lady of the Valley in there, and it's almost being lost in front of this purple dead nettle, which is beautiful, very subtle, but in the wrong place. And I suppose that is the definition of a weed versus a cottage garden or natural flower, isn't it? If you can contain them and they flower well and look good where you've got them, they're a flower. If they're thugging over other things and looking a mess, then it becomes a weed. And this area, we've got this lovely little flowering pink strawberry that again we tend to try and encourage into this area. It's just starting to come into flower very early for a strawberry. It does fruit, but nothing that's really edible to any culinary delight. It's just a pretty flower, and carpets over this area under the rose canopy above me very well. But again, it's starting to come out and invade a little out into the courtyard garden, so we're going to knock that back. But just look at the volume of seedlings we've got coming up in this area. These are all hollyhock seedlings, those ovate leaves with the striation down them. Hundreds upon thousands of hundreds of young hollyhocks. Now these we will leave just a tiny percentage to come up. The rest will all be hoed out, because you can't keep everything all of the time. And the hollyhocks in this area, we've got 4 or 5 clumps of really well established crowns. Here's one, quite a small young one. I think that's probably only 2 or 3 years old. The one just to my side here, looking very healthy, still not got its full size leaf on, but again at this time of year they're just emerging, and it will be another couple of months before they're in full flower. So we want to grow those on, and part of the secret of growing good hollyhocks is some good light and air circulation around them to reduce the amount of rust that you've got on them. You can see that's already starting to be a little bit of an issue on this leaf here, just the first starts of some rust, that little orange flecks all over that leaf. And if I just turn it over, you'll see the rust spores developing on the underside of this leaf. So the best thing you can do for that is to remove that leaf, debulk the rust infection on the hollyhock, burn that or put it into your waste. Do not compost it, because they're very robust little spores. You'll just spread them around the garden, and by debulking the infection on the hollyhock, you'll allow that to grow on much better than if it gets a heavy infestation of rust. So we're going to work our way through this border, weeding, thinning, removing all the perennial weed that we don't want in here. Just look at that. sycamore seedling that's obviously been there for about 2 or 3 years at the base of this rose, but again it's getting back down there with the rose arching over the front. That is the challenge in borders like this, where you've got quite a naturalistic both seeded and perennial planting. So we're just going to tidy it all up, and hopefully it will look a lot better, and what we do want to grow in here will be all the better for it in this year and also subsequent years.